The ancient Greeks believed that before anything existed, before the earth, before the sky, before even time itself, there was only chaos. A vast, yawning void of nothingness. From this emptiness came everything we know. The gods who shaped mountains with their hands, the heroes who fought monsters larger than ships, the stories that have echoed through 3,000 years to reach us here, in this quiet moment. These weren't just tales told around fires. The Greeks saw their gods everywhere. In the crash of thunder, in the pull of ocean tides, in the first light of dawn, their world pulsed with divine presence. Every mountain had its nymph, every river had its god, every human emotion, love, rage, jealousy, hope, had a deity who understood it intimately. But here's what made Greek mythology different from every other ancient belief system. Their gods were flawed. Zeus, king of the gods, couldn't control his desires. Hera seethed with jealousy. Apollo fell in love with mortals who turned into trees to escape him. These weren't distant, perfect beings. They were mirrors, reflecting every human strength and weakness back at us, magnified to cosmic proportions. The stories we're about to explore shaped Western civilization. They gave us words we use every day. Panic from the god Pan, serial from the goddess Ceres, chronological from the Titan Kronos. They gave us constellations that still guide ships. They gave us metaphors that psychologists still use to understand the human mind. These myths were maps, not of places, but of experiences. How to face impossible odds like Odysseus. How pride destroys even the mightiest, like it destroyed Achilles. How love can lead us into darkness and back out again, as it did for Orpheus. So let's begin where the Greeks began, with chaos and the strange, violent, beautiful birth of everything that followed. In the beginning, there was chaos, but not chaos as we understand it. Not disorder or confusion. The Greek word chaos meant something more like a chasm, an infinite gap, a yawning space of pure potential. It was conscious in its own alien way, and from this consciousness came the first beings. First emerged Gaia, the earth herself, not a goddess who ruled the earth, but the earth as a living, breathing entity. Every mountain was her bone. Every valley was the curve of her body. Every cave was an entrance into her depths. Then came Tartarus, the abyss, a place so deep below the earth that an anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days before hitting bottom. This wasn't just a location. Tartarus was alive too, a presence of pure dread and containment. The Greeks understood something we sometimes forget, that darkness and depth are as fundamental to existence as light and surface. Next appeared Eros, not the chubby cherub with arrows that Romans would later imagine, but a primordial force of attraction and creation. Eros was what made particles draw together, what made elements combine, what made life possible. Without Eros, nothing would ever touch anything else. The universe would remain forever scattered and alone. From chaos also came Erebus, the darkness that fills all empty spaces, and Nyx, the night herself. These two found each other in the void. Their union produced something unprecedented. Hemera, the day, and Ether, the bright upper air that gods breathe. For the first time, opposites existed. Light knew itself by knowing darkness. But Gaia was lonely. She was everything solid and stable, but she had no companion, no equal. So from herself, without any partner, she brought forth Uranus, the sky. He emerged as her perfect counterpart. Where she was solid, he was vast and empty. Where she was brown and green, he was infinite blue. He wrapped himself around her completely, touching every part of her surface. Gaia also birthed the mountains, the Aurea, each one a distinct personality jutting from her surface. And Pontus, the sea, who was less a child than an aspect of herself turned liquid and restless. The stage was set. The principal players had arrived, but this was just the calm before a storm that would rage for eons. The union of Gaia and Uranus was productive, perhaps too productive. First came the 12 Titans, 6 sons and 6 daughters. These weren't the crude giants that the word Titanic might suggest. They were beautiful, powerful, and complex. Oceanus controlled all the world's waters. Hyperion was light itself. Theia was sight and the blue of the sky. Kronos, or Kronos as he's often called, was time, though not time as we experience it. He was time as a force of decay and harvest, of endings that make new beginnings possible. But Gaia and Uranus didn't stop with the Titans. Next came 3 creatures that made Uranus recoil in disgust: the Cyclopes, Brontes, whose name meant thunder, Steropes, lightning, and Arges, brightness. Each had a single enormous eye in the center of their forehead. They would later become the forgers of Zeus's thunderbolts, but for now, they were just children whose own father couldn't bear to look at them. Even worse, in Uranus's view, were the 3 Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones. Cottus, Briareos, and Gyges each had 50 heads and 100 arms. They were living armies, beings of pure destructive potential. The sight of them filled Uranus with such revulsion that he did something unforgivable. He shoved them back into Gaia's womb, refusing to let them be born. Imagine Gaia's agony. These massive beings trapped inside her, fully formed but unable to emerge. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires pressed against her from within, their 100 hands pushing at her boundaries, their 50 heads crying for freedom. Uranus, who was supposed to be her equal and companion, had become her torturer. Gaia's pain transformed into rage. From the depths of herself, she drew forth a new substance, adamantine, a metal so hard it could cut through anything. She shaped it into a sickle, curved and sharp as crescent moon. Then she called her Titan children to her. "Who among you will help me?" she asked. "Your father has become a tyrant. He imprisons your brothers out of vanity and fear. Who will stand against him?" The Titans looked at each other nervously. Uranus was the sky itself. How could anyone fight the sky? But Kronos, the youngest and cleverest, stepped forward. Perhaps he already felt the threads of fate pulling him toward this moment. Perhaps he simply hated his father more than he feared him. "I'll do it," Kronos said, taking the adamantine sickle from his mother's hands. Its weight felt right, felt destined. That night, as Uranus descended to embrace Gaia as he did every evening, spreading himself across her entire surface, Kronos was ready, hidden in ambush with his 4 brothers, Hyperion, Koios, Krios, and Iapetos. Holding Uranus at the corners of the earth, Kronos struck. The sickle swept through the air in a perfect arc. The scream that tore from Uranus shook the cosmos. He reeled back into the heights of heaven, wounded beyond healing, cursing his son with his retreat. "You too will be overthrown by your own child," he prophesied. "As you have done to me, so it will be done to you." The blood that fell from Uranus's wound didn't simply disappear. Where it touched Gaia, she brought forth the Erinyes, the Furies, spirits of vengeance with snakes for hair and blood dripping from their eyes. She also birthed the giants, massive warriors who would one day wage war against the gods, and the Meliae, ash tree nymphs from whose wood humans would craft their first spears. Violence had entered the world, and it was already reproducing itself. But something else happened that night. Something beautiful. Kronos threw the severed parts of Uranus into the sea. Where they touched the water, foam gathered, white and pure. From this foam emerged a figure of impossible beauty. Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire. Even from violence and betrayal, beauty could be born. The Greeks understood this paradox in their bones. Kronos was now ruler of the cosmos, but he wasn't free. His father's curse echoed in his mind. He married his sister Rhea, and she began bearing him children, gods more beautiful and terrible than anything that had come before. But with each birth, Kronos heard his father's words again. "Your child will overthrow you." So Kronos made a monstrous decision. As each child was born, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, he swallowed them whole. They couldn't die, being immortal, but they remained trapped in his stomach, growing in darkness, biding their time. Rhea's grief and fury grew with each swallowed child. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she had to act. She went to her mother, Gaia, who understood the pain of having children imprisoned. Together, they hatched a plan. When the 6th child was born, a boy named Zeus, Rhea hid him away in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete. To Kronos, she presented a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. The Titan, so consumed by his paranoia, didn't even look. He swallowed the stone just as he had swallowed his children. In that hidden cave, Zeus grew strong. He was nursed by a goat named Amalthea and protected by the Coretes, warriors who clashed their shields and shouted to mask the baby's cries. The honey of wild bees sustained him. The earth itself conspired to raise this child who would reshape everything. But even as Zeus grew toward his destiny, the cosmos held its breath. The cycle of sons overthrowing fathers seemed unbreakable. Would Zeus simply become another Kronos, another Uranus, or would he find a way to break the pattern? Zeus grew up wild and free on the mountains of Crete. The nymphs taught him the names of every plant and stream. The Coretes showed him how to fight with cunning rather than just strength. Eagles brought him news from across the world. He learned to throw his voice like thunder across valleys, a skill that would serve him well. When he came of age, his grandmother Gaia appeared to him. She was the earth beneath his feet, but she took form to speak. An ancient woman with soil in the creases of her skin and flowers blooming from her hair. "It's time," she said simply. "Your siblings wait in your father's belly." The cosmos groans under Kronos' paranoid rule. She gave Zeus 2 gifts. First, a position. He would become Kronos' cupbearer, serving the Titan his wine. Second, a drug, a mixture of mustard and wine that would force Kronos to vomit. The plan was simple, but dangerous. One suspicious glance from Kronos, and Zeus would join his siblings in darkness. Zeus took his place in Kronos' hall, his true identity hidden. The Titan Lord was massive, his presence warping time around him. Flowers bloomed and withered in his shadow within seconds. Mortals aged years just walking past his throne. But he had grown complacent, confident that his swallowed children could never threaten him. At the feast that night, Zeus poured the tainted wine. Kronos drank deeply, then suddenly clutched his stomach. The retching that followed shook the pillars of heaven. First came the stone, still wrapped in its mouldering cloth. Then, one by one, Kronos' children emerged, fully grown, furious, and ready for war. Poseidon came first, seaweed tangled in his beard despite never having seen the ocean. Hades followed, shadows clinging to him like a second skin. Then Hera, regal even covered in divine bile. Demeter, already causing flowers to bloom where she stepped. And Hestia, the eldest, who would become goddess of the hearth. The 6 siblings stood together for the first time, and Kronos knew his father's curse had found him, but he wouldn't surrender easily. He called his fellow Titans to arms. The war that followed would last 10 years and reshape the architecture of reality itself. The Titanomachy, as it came to be known, wasn't fought with simple swords and spears. Mountains were torn from their roots and hurled like stones. Oceanus flooded entire continents. Hyperion turned the sun into a weapon, scorching the earth. Atlas and his brothers piled mountain upon mountain, trying to build a ladder to storm Olympus, where Zeus had made his stronghold. For 10 years, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The young gods were powerful, but outnumbered. The Titans had experience and established dominions. The earth itself cracked under their conflict. Mortals, for humans had begun to appear during this age, cowered in caves, watching the sky burn and the seas boil. Then Gaia came to Zeus with counsel. "You cannot win with strength alone," she told him. "Free those whom Kronos fears most. Free the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones from Tartarus where he imprisoned them." Zeus descended into the abyss, a journey that took 9 days of falling through darkness. Tartarus was a place where even gods could lose themselves. The very air was made of despair. Rivers of fire and ice wound through landscapes of pure shadow. At its heart, behind adamantine gates, Zeus found his uncles. The Cyclopes had spent eons in darkness, but they hadn't been idle. They had been forging, creating weapons from the raw materials of imprisonment and rage. When Zeus freed them, they presented him with gifts that would define his reign. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt, not just a weapon, but crystallized storm, the power to split atoms before atoms were known. To Poseidon, the trident, which could shake the earth, summon tsunamis, and create islands from the seafloor. To Hades, a helm of invisibility, not just hiding the wearer from sight, but from existence itself, making him absent from reality while still able to act within it. The 100-handed ones were even more terrible in their gratitude. Each could throw 100 mountain-sized boulders at once. Their very presence was overwhelming. 50 heads chanting war songs, 100 hands drumming thunder on the ground. They took positions at the gates of Tartarus, both guarding it and ready to emerge when Zeus called. The tide of war turned instantly. Zeus's thunderbolts could pierce any defense, strike any target across infinite distance. Poseidon caused the earth to swallow Titan armies. Hades, invisible, walked through enemy lines, sowing confusion and fear. And when the 100-handed ones joined the battle, their barrage of stones was like a solid wall of destruction advancing across the battlefield. The final battle took place on the plains of Thessaly. Kronos himself took the field, his scythe, the same one that had castrated Uranus, sweeping through time, aging armies to dust. But Zeus had learned patience in his years of hiding. He waited for the perfect moment, then struck with such force that the thunderbolt shattered Kronos' scythe. Time itself seemed to hiccup. Without his weapon, without his will to fight broken, Kronos surrendered. Zeus faced a choice that would define what kind of ruler he would be. He could destroy Kronos, continue the cycle of patricide, or he could be different. Zeus chose imprisonment over death. Most of the Titans were cast into Tartarus, guarded by the 100-handed ones. But not all. Oceanus and Tethys, who had remained neutral, kept their freedom. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had fought alongside Zeus, were honored. Atlas, who had led the Titan armies, received a special punishment to hold the sky on his shoulders for eternity, keeping Uranus and Gaia forever apart. Some say Kronos was later freed and became ruler of the Isles of the Blessed, where heroes go after death. Others say he remains in Tartarus still, dreaming of the day his chains might break. The Greeks told both stories, understanding that some truths are too complex for a single narrative. With the Titans defeated, the three brothers drew lots to divide the cosmos. Zeus won the sky and became king of the gods. Poseidon claimed the seas. Hades received the underworld. The earth would belong to all three, though Zeus's word would be final in disputes. The sisters chose their own domains. Hera became goddess of marriage and family, eventually marrying Zeus in a union that would be as stormy as any thundercloud. Demeter took dominion over agriculture and the harvest. Hestia, the eldest and in many ways the wisest, chose the hearth, the center of every home, the flame that meant civilization itself. They established their court on Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, where the air was so thin that mortals couldn't breathe it. Here they built palaces of cloud and starlight. Here they would feast on ambrosia and nectar, substances that maintained their immortality. Here they would watch the world below, intervening in human affairs for reasons ranging from compassion to petty spite. But Zeus's troubles were far from over. Gaia, though she had helped him defeat Kronos, grew angry at the imprisonment of her Titan children. She would birth new monsters to challenge his rule. First the giants, then Typhon, the most terrible creature ever to exist. And there was the matter of creating a new race to populate the earth, humans, who would prove to be both the gods' greatest creation and their most persistent headache. The age of the Olympians had begun. but it would be anything but peaceful. Zeus's victory over the Titans didn't bring immediate peace. Power, the Greeks understood, is never simply seized. It must be constantly maintained, negotiated, defended. And Zeus's first challenge came from an unexpected source: love. Before he married Hera, Zeus took as his first wife Metis, the titaness of wisdom and crafty thought. She had helped him during the war, creating the drug that freed his siblings. She was clever beyond measure. Her name literally meant wisdom or cunning. But prophecy haunted Zeus as it had haunted his father. Gaia and Uranus warned him. Metis would bear 2 children. First, a daughter wise beyond all other gods. Second, a son who would overthrow Zeus and rule heaven. The cycle threatened to continue. Zeus made a decision that was both clever and monstrous. He challenged Metis to a shape-shifting contest, a game they often played. She became a hawk, he became an eagle. She became a fish, he became a shark. Finally, to show her ultimate skill, she became a single drop of water, and Zeus swallowed her. But Metis was already pregnant with their first child. Inside Zeus, she began crafting armor and weapons for their daughter. The clanging of her hammer on anvil echoed in Zeus's skull. Days passed, then weeks. The pounding grew worse. Zeus's head felt ready to split. Finally, the pain became unbearable. Zeus called for Hephaestus, though some say it was Prometheus, to take an axe to his skull. The other gods watched in horror as the blade fell. Zeus's head cracked open like an egg. From the fissure leaped Athena, fully grown, fully armed, releasing a war cry that shook the foundations of Olympus. She wore armor that gleamed like thought itself. Her eyes held the grey of storm clouds and owl feathers. In her hand was a spear that could pierce any lie. She was wisdom incarnate, but wisdom with an edge, strategic, tactical, dangerous. Zeus's head sealed itself, the pain vanished, and he looked upon his daughter with something approaching awe. By swallowing Metis, he had absorbed her wisdom into himself. By birthing Athena from his own body, with no mother to claim her, she was entirely his. The prophecy was cheated. The son who would have overthrown him was never born. Athena became Zeus's favorite child, the only one allowed to wield his thunderbolts. She was everything he valued: intelligent, disciplined, strategic. Unlike Ares, who represented war's chaos and bloodlust, Athena embodied war's necessity and intelligence. She would become patron of Athens, goddess of crafts and wisdom, protector of heroes who fought with their minds as much as their muscles. But Zeus's marriage to Hera would prove more complicated than swallowing wisdom. Hera was his equal in many ways, a goddess of immense power, daughter of Kronos, queen by her own right. Their wedding was the event of the age. Gaia herself gave them a tree that bore golden apples as a wedding gift, which Hera planted in her garden at the western edge of the world. Their honeymoon lasted 300 years, but even divine marriages have their troubles, and Zeus's were self-inflicted. He couldn't remain faithful. Something in his nature, perhaps the same force that made him king, drove him to pursue goddess, nymph, and mortal woman alike. His affairs produced some of the most important figures in Greek mythology. With Leto, a titaness, he fathered Apollo and Artemis, though Hera made Leto's pregnancy a nightmare, forbidding any land from sheltering her. Leto finally gave birth on Delos, a floating island that technically wasn't land at all. Apollo emerged first, glowing like the sun he would come to represent. He immediately helped deliver his twin sister Artemis, who would become goddess of the hunt and the moon. Both remained forever young and beautiful, but took opposite approaches to love. Apollo pursued it constantly and tragically, while Artemis rejected it entirely. With Maia, daughter of Atlas, Zeus fathered Hermes in a cave at dawn. The child was born at sunrise, invented the lyre by noon, and had stolen Apollo's cattle by sunset. Hermes was speed and cunning personified, the messenger god who could travel between all realms, Olympus, Earth, and the Underworld. With Demeter, his own sister, Zeus had Persephone. This daughter would become the center of one of Greek mythology's most important stories, her abduction by Hades and the creation of the seasons. But that tale belongs to a later chapter. With Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, Zeus would father Dionysus. But this affair ended tragically when Hera, disguised as an old woman, convinced Semele to ask Zeus to appear in his true divine form. Zeus, bound by an oath, had to comply. His appearance, raw divine energy, thunder and lightning incarnate, incinerated Semele instantly. Zeus saved the unborn Dionysus by sewing him into his own thigh until birth. Thus Dionysus became twice born, the only Olympian god with a mortal parent.
Hera's rage at these infidelities became legendary. She couldn't directly attack Zeus, he was too powerful, but his lovers and children were fair game. She sent serpents to kill the infant Heracles. She drove Dionysus mad. She turned Io into a cow and set a 100-eyed giant to guard her. She transformed Callisto into a bear. Yet Hera was more than just a jealous wife. She was the goddess of marriage itself, protector of women in childbirth, guardian of the sanctity of oaths. Cities and heroes sought her blessing. Her peacocks, with their all-seeing eye patterns, reminded everyone that nothing escaped her notice. The other Olympians carved out their own domains. Poseidon ruled the seas with his trident, creating horses from sea foam and earthquakes from spite. He built an underwater palace of coral and pearl, where sea nymphs danced and hippocampi, horses with fishtails, pulled his chariot. Hades rarely left his underworld kingdom. He wasn't evil, as later traditions would paint him, just stern, inflexible, and wealthy beyond measure. Every precious metal and gem came from his domain. Every soul eventually became his subject. He was the only god who never broke his word, because death keeps all promises. Demeter wandered the earth, teaching agriculture to mortals. Where she walked, grain sprouted. Where she smiled, orchards bloomed. She represented the civilizing force of farming, the thing that let humans stop wandering and build communities. Hestia tended the sacred fire on Olympus. She was the stillness at the center of the divine storm, the one who never fought, never schemed, never left her post. Every hearth in every home was her altar. Every fire was her presence. Apollo became god of too many things to count: music, poetry, prophecy, healing, plague, archery, the sun. He was perfection personified, which made his failures all the more tragic. Every woman he loved either died or transformed to escape him. Daphne became a laurel tree. Cassandra received the gift of prophecy, but the curse that no one would believe her. Artemis roamed wild places with her pack of hunting hounds and her band of maiden followers. She was fierce in her independence, turning any man who saw her bathing into a stag to be torn apart by his own dogs. Yet she was also protector of children and women in childbirth, the wild goddess who helped civilization thrive by keeping wildness at bay. Ares embodied war's brutality. Even the other gods disliked him. Homer has Zeus call him most hateful of all gods. He delighted in blood and confusion, the screams of the dying, the chaos of battle. Only Aphrodite loved him, perhaps because love and war are both forms of madness. Aphrodite herself was complexity incarnate, born from violence but embodying beauty, married to Hephaestus, the lame smith god, but conducting an eternal affair with Ares. She could make anyone fall in love, god or mortal. Her girdle was desire itself, given form. Hephaestus found solace in his forge beneath volcanoes. Cast from Olympus as a baby because of his deformity, some say by Zeus, others by Hera, he became the god's craftsman. Every magical item, every impossible palace, every trap and treasure came from his hammer. He was proof that the gods valued skill over beauty, at least sometimes. Hermes zipped between all realms, carrying messages, guiding souls, facilitating theft and commerce in equal measure. He was the god of boundaries and those who crossed them, travelers, merchants, thieves. His winged sandals let him move faster than thought. His caduceus, a staff with two snakes, could wake the dead or put the living to sleep.
And Dionysus, the latecomer, brought something new to Olympus. Ecstasy, wine, madness, theatre, religious fervour. He was the god of losing yourself and finding yourself again. His followers, the Maenads, danced themselves into frenzies where they could tear apart wild animals with their bare hands. He represented everything that couldn't be controlled, categorized, or made rational. This was the Olympian order, not a peaceful pantheon, but a family, with all the dysfunction that implies. They loved, fought, schemed, and reconciled in patterns that would repeat throughout human history. But their greatest test was yet to come, for Gaia had one more child to birth, one more challenge to Zeus's rule. His name was Typhon, and he would nearly end everything. Gaia's anger festered like an infected wound. Her Titan children remained imprisoned in Tartarus, and Zeus showed no sign of mercy. So the Earth Mother reached deep into herself, into places even she rarely touched, the spaces where nightmares take physical form. She mated with Tartarus itself, the abyss, and from their union came Typhon. Words failed to capture Typhon's horror. His head touched the stars. Instead of fingers, 100 dragon heads grew from each hand, each one spitting different colored fire, speaking in different tongues, some human, some divine, some in languages that predated speech itself. His bottom half was massive viper coils that could wrap around mountains. His eyes burned with such hatred that birds fell dead from the sky when he gazed upward. When Typhon emerged from the earth in Cilicia, the cosmos itself recoiled. His roar combined every sound of rage. The lion's roar, the bull's bellow, the dog's howl, thunder's crash, the hiss of 1,000 serpents. Mountains melted where he stepped. Seas boiled away from his presence. The Olympians saw him coming and did something they'd never done before. They ran. All except Zeus fled to Egypt, transforming into animals to hide. Apollo became a crow, Hermes an ibis, Ares a boar, Dionysus a goat. Even mighty Athena became a cat, slinking into shadows. This is why, the Greeks explained, Egyptians worshipped gods with animal heads. They were remembering the disguised Olympians. Zeus stood alone against Typhon. Their battle reshaped geography. Zeus hurled thunderbolt after thunderbolt, each one with the power to level cities. Typhon caught them in his dragon mouths and spat them back as twisted fire. They grappled from Syria to Thrace, their combat visible from every corner of the earth. Then Typhon did the impossible. He won. Using his coils, he trapped Zeus and tore out the god's sinews, the divine tendons that gave him his strength. Without them, Zeus was helpless as a mortal child. Typhon dragged him to a cave in Cilicia, hiding the sinews in a bearskin and setting the she-dragon Delphine to guard them. For the first time since defeating Kronos, Zeus was powerless. Typhon began his march on Olympus, ready to tear down the palaces of the gods and remake the cosmos in his own monstrous image. The world held its breath. But Hermes and Pan, some say it was Hermes and Egipan, hadn't fled with the others. Using cunning instead of strength, they crept to the cave. Pan played his pipes, a melody so beautiful that even Delphine dozed. Hermes, swift and silent, stole back Zeus's sinews and restored them to the god-king. Zeus erupted from the cave with renewed fury, but this time he fought smarter. He lured Typhon to Mount Nysa, where the fates waited with a trap. They offered Typhon ephemeral fruits, telling him they would make him stronger. Typhon, drunk on his near victory, ate them eagerly, but the fruits were meant for mortals. Instead of strengthening him, they made him vulnerable. The final battle took place in Sicily. Zeus, now fighting with calculation rather than rage, maneuvered Typhon toward Mount Etna. With one tremendous effort, he lifted the entire mountain and dropped it on the monster. Typhon was trapped, buried, but not dead. Immortal monsters rarely die clean deaths. To this day, when Etna rumbles and spits fire, the Greeks said, that's Typhon struggling to break free. With Typhon defeated, the Olympians returned from Egypt, sheepish but safe. Zeus had proven he could defend his throne even alone. even against the worst monster ever birthed. But Typhon left a legacy. Before his imprisonment, Typhon had mated with Echidna, the mother of all monsters, herself half woman, half serpent. Their children would plague heroes for generations. The Sphinx, who would one day riddle with Oedipus, the Nemean lion, whose golden fur no weapon could pierce, the Hydra, whose heads multiplied when cut, Cerberus, the three-headed dog who would guard Hades' gates, the Chimera, lion in front, goat in middle, serpent behind, breathing fire. These monsters served a purpose in the Greek mind. They were obstacles that made heroes heroic. Without monsters, there could be no monster slayers. Without chaos threatening the borders, order had no meaning. But not all of Gaia's children were monsters. The giants, the gigantes, were her last attempt at revenge. Born from the blood of Uranus that had fallen on her so long ago, they had been growing in strength, waiting for their moment. They were humanoid but massive, with serpents for legs, and they could hurl mountains like pebbles. The Gigantomachy, the war with the giants, came with a troubling prophecy. The gods could not defeat the giants alone. They needed the help of a mortal hero. This would be Heracles, but his story deserves its own telling. For now, know that gods and mortals fought side by side, and the cosmic order held. With external threats defeated, the gods turned to organizing the mortal world. Different versions exist of humanity's creation. Some said humans sprouted from the earth like plants. Others said they were formed from the ash trees that grew from Uranus's blood. But the most detailed story involved Prometheus. Prometheus was a titan who had sided with Zeus during the war. His name meant forethought. He could see consequences before they happened. His brother Epimetheus, afterthought, only understood things once they'd already occurred. Zeus gave them the task of creating and equipping all mortal creatures. Epimetheus went first, enthusiastically giving out gifts. To the eagle, flight and keen sight. To the lion, strength and courage. To the rabbit, speed and alertness. To the turtle, armor. To the fish, the ability to breathe water. By the time he got to humans, everything was gone. Humans stood naked, weak, slow, without claws or fangs or shells. They would have died out immediately, prey to every other creature. But Prometheus loved these helpless beings. Some say it's because he shaped them himself from clay, breathing life into them with Athena's help. Others say he simply saw potential where others saw weakness. So Prometheus gave humans something no other creature had. He taught them to walk upright, to look at the stars instead of the ground. He gave them mathematics and writing. He showed them how to yoke oxen, sail ships, use herbs as medicine. But his greatest gift would also be his downfall. Fire belonged to the gods alone. It was the power of transformation, turning raw to cooked, ore to metal, clay to pottery, darkness to light. Zeus had forbidden sharing it with mortals. He wanted humans weak, dependent, offering sacrifices, but never threatening divine supremacy. Prometheus made his choice. He climbed Olympus at night and stole fire from Hephaestus's forge. Some say from the wheels of the sun's chariot itself. He hid it in a fennel stalk, its hollow stem perfect for carrying embers. He brought it to humanity. The first cooking fire changed everything. Humans could survive winter. They could work metal. They could see in darkness. They could keep predators at bay. Fire made civilization possible. Zeus's rage was absolute. Prometheus had not just stolen fire. He had upset the cosmic balance. The punishment had to be equally absolute. Zeus had Prometheus chained to a mountain in the Caucasus. Every day, an eagle, Zeus's sacred bird, would tear open his side and eat his liver. Every night, being immortal, Prometheus would heal. The torture would last 30,000 years before Heracles would free him. But Zeus wasn't done punishing humanity for accepting fire. He commissioned Hephaestus to create a new kind of human, the first woman. Hephaestus sculpted Pandora from clay, making her irresistibly beautiful. Each god gave her a gift. Aphrodite gave her grace. Athena taught her weaving. Hermes gave her cunning and curiosity. Her name meant all gifted. Zeus sent Pandora to Prometheus as a bride. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept gifts from Zeus, but Prometheus, true to his nature, only remembered this warning after he'd already accepted. Pandora came with a wedding present, a sealed jar. Never open this, Zeus had told her, knowing perfectly well what curiosity would do. The jar sat in their home, beautiful and mysterious. Pandora resisted for as long as she could. Some say days, some say years. But eventually, inevitably, she lifted the lid. Out flew every evil that plagues humanity. Disease, old age, hard labor, insanity, vice, suffering of every kind. They scattered across the world like a plague of invisible locusts. Pandora slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Only one thing remained in the jar: hope. Why hope stayed trapped has been debated for millennia. Was it mercy, keeping humanity's one comfort close, or was it the cruelest punishment of all, giving humans all the world's evils while denying them the one thing that makes suffering bearable? The Greeks never agreed. They understood that hope itself is ambiguous. It can inspire us to endure or delude us into accepting the unacceptable. This was how the Greeks explained the human condition. We have fire, knowledge, technology, the power to transform our world. But we also have suffering, and it came from the same source. Progress and pain are inseparable. Every gift has its price. The Age of Heroes began with a mistake, as most Greek stories do. King Acrisius of Argos received a prophecy that his grandson would kill him. Having only a daughter, Danae, he thought he could cheat fate by imprisoning her in a bronze tower with no doors, only a small slot for food. But you cannot build a prison that can keep out Zeus. Zeus came to Danae as a shower of gold, liquid sunlight pouring through the window slot. From this union came Perseus. When Acrisius discovered his daughter nursing an infant, he couldn't bring himself to kill them directly. That would invoke the Furies. Instead, he locked mother and child in a wooden chest and threw them into the sea. The chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found them. He was a good man, the brother of the island's king, Polydectes. Perseus grew up strong and protective of his mother. Too protective, in King Polydectes' view. The king wanted Danae for himself, but Perseus stood in the way. Polydectes hatched a plan. He announced he was collecting wedding gifts to marry another woman. Every guest had to bring a horse. Perseus, raised by a fisherman, had no horse to give. In his shame and pride, he made a rash promise. "Name any gift, and I'll bring it to you." "Bring me the head of Medusa," Polydectes said, smiling. It was a death sentence. Medusa was a Gorgon, one of 3 sisters so hideous that looking at them turned living creatures to stone. She hadn't always been a monster. Once, she was a beautiful priestess of Athena, with hair that rivaled the goddess's own. But Poseidon raped her in Athena's temple. Athena, in one of mythology's cruelest injustices, punished Medusa for the desecration. She transformed her hair into venomous snakes and made her face a weapon. Perseus would have died on his first step, but the gods intervened. Athena appeared to him, perhaps feeling guilty about Medusa, perhaps simply loving heroes who used their minds. She gave him a polished bronze shield, mirror bright. "Never look at Medusa directly," she warned. "Use the shield as a mirror." Hermes gave Perseus an adamantine sickle, the same unbreakable metal Kronos had used against Uranus. He also gave him winged sandals for flight, a cap of invisibility from Hades, and a special bag that could safely hold whatever was placed inside. But first, Perseus had to find the Gorgons. Only the Graiae knew their location, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye and tooth between them. Perseus found them at the world's edge, passing the eye from socket to socket to take turns seeing. He waited for the perfect moment, then snatched the eye mid-pass. "Our eye! Give us our eye!" they shrieked. Perseus bargained, the location of their Gorgon sisters for the return of their sight. They had no choice but to comply. Perseus flew to the Gorgon's lair at the edge of the world. where statues of petrified heroes littered the ground like a warning. The three sisters slept, Stheno and Euryale, who were immortal, and Medusa, who could die. Using Athena's shield as a mirror, walking backward, Perseus approached. The snakes of Medusa's hair sensed him and began to hiss. With one perfect strike, he severed her head. From Medusa's neck sprang two children of her union with Poseidon, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior with a golden sword. Perseus grabbed Medusa's head, stuffed it in his bag, put on the cap of invisibility, and flew as the immortal Gorgons woke screaming. On his flight home, Perseus saw a woman chained to a rock by the sea. This was Andromeda, princess of Ethiopia. Her mother had boasted she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. Poseidon, defending his nymph's honor, sent a sea monster to destroy the kingdom unless Andromeda was sacrificed. Perseus saw the monster approaching. Scales like black iron, teeth like swords, large enough to swallow ships whole. He could have flown away. Instead, he dove. Using the winged sandals to dance around the monster's strikes, he pulled out Medusa's head. The monster looked and became a cliff that sailors still avoid. Perseus married Andromeda and returned to Seriphos to find his mother hiding in the temple, Polydectes pursuing her. The king laughed when Perseus claimed he'd brought Medusa's head. "Prove it," he demanded. Perseus warned everyone who valued their lives to look away, then pulled out the head. Polydectes and his court became a collection of statues, frozen in their final moment of mockery. The prophecy about killing his grandfather? It came true, of course. Years later, at athletic games, Perseus threw a discus that went astray in the wind. It struck and killed an old man in the crowd, Acrisius, who had been wandering in exile. Fate, the Greeks knew, always collects its debts. Perseus gave Medusa's head to Athena, who placed it on her shield, the Aegis. He lived a long life, founded the city of Mycenae, and when he died, Athena placed him among the stars as a constellation. But his greatest legacy was his descendants, including Heracles, the greatest hero of all. While Perseus represented the clever hero who succeeded through divine help and intelligence, Theseus embodied a different heroic ideal, the civilizing force, the one who makes the wild world safe for ordinary people. Theseus had two fathers, which was complicated even by Greek standards. His mother Aethra slept with both Aegeus, king of Athens, and Poseidon on the same night. Aegeus, believing himself the father, left his sword and sandals under a heavy rock. "When the boy can lift this stone," he told Aethra, "send him to me in Athens." Theseus grew up in his grandfather's court in Trojan. At 16, he lifted the rock easily and claimed his inheritance. His mother begged him to sail safely to Athens, but Theseus chose to walk along the dangerous coast road. He wanted to be like his cousin Heracles, a hero who cleared the world of monsters. The road to Athens was terrorized by 6 killers, each with their own sadistic style. Periphetes carried a bronze club and smashed travelers' skulls. Theseus took the club and made it his signature weapon. Sinis tied victims between bent pine trees, then released them to be torn apart. Theseus gave him the same death. Siren forced travelers to wash his feet at a cliff's edge, then kicked them into the sea where a giant turtle ate them. Theseus pretended to comply, then threw Siren to his own turtle. Cercyon challenged passers to wrestling matches, crushing them to death. Theseus, trained in the new art of wrestling, defeated him with technique over strength. The worst was Procrustes, who offered travelers a bed for the night. If they were too short for the bed, he stretched them on a rack until they fit. If too tall, he cut off whatever hung over. Theseus gave him a taste of his own hospitality, fitting him to his own bed with an axe. When Theseus reached Athens, the city was in chaos. Aegeus had married the sorceress Medea, the same who had helped Jason win the Golden Fleece. She recognized Theseus immediately and saw a threat to her own son's inheritance. She convinced Aegeus that this young stranger was an assassin. At a feast, Medea served Theseus poisoned wine, but as he reached for the cup, Theseus drew his father's sword to cut his meat. Aegeus recognized the blade and knocked the poison away. Medea fled Athens in a chariot pulled by dragons, never to return. But Athens faced a darker problem. Years before, King Minos of Crete's son had died visiting Athens. As punishment, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete every 9 years. These tributes were fed to the Minotaur. The Minotaur was Minos's shame made flesh. His wife Pasiphae had been cursed by Poseidon to fall in love with a bull. The master craftsman Daedalus built her a hollow wooden cow so she could mate with it. The offspring was the Minotaur, human body, bull's head, an appetite for human flesh. Minos imprisoned the monster in the labyrinth, also designed by Daedalus, a maze so complex that even its creator could barely escape it. The Athenian tributes were thrown in to wander until the Minotaur found them. When the time came for the 3rd tribute, Theseus volunteered. His father begged him not to go. They agreed. If Theseus survived, he would change his ship's black sails to white on the return journey. In Crete, Princess Ariadne saw Theseus and fell instantly in love. She went to Daedalus, who gave her the secret to his labyrinth, a ball of thread. "Tie one end at the entrance," he said. "Unwind it as you go. Follow it back." Ariadne gave Theseus the thread and a sword. He entered the labyrinth at night, unwinding the thread behind him. In the center, he found the Minotaur sleeping, surrounded by gnawed bones. The battle was brutal. The Minotaur had the strength of a bull and the cunning of a man. But Theseus was faster, smarter. He drove the sword through the monster's throat. Following the thread back, Theseus led the other tributes to freedom. They fled Crete with Ariadne, but on the island of Naxos, something strange happened. Some say Theseus abandoned her while she slept. Others say Dionysus appeared and claimed her as his bride, and Theseus had no choice. Either way, Ariadne woke alone on the beach, watching black sails disappear over the horizon. Those black sails, Theseus forgot to change them. When Aegeus saw them from the cliffs of Athens, he assumed his son was dead. He threw himself into the sea, which still bears his name, the Aegean. Theseus became king of Athens and transformed it from a collection of villages into a unified city-state. He established democracy, or at least its early form. He gave sanctuary to those in need. He represented the Greek ideal of civilization, triumphing over barbarism. But like most Greek heroes, his story ended badly. He abducted Helen of Troy as a child, starting enmities that would last generations. He tried to help his friend kidnap Persephone from Hades, and ended up trapped in the Underworld until Heracles freed him. His own people eventually exiled him. He died alone on the island of Skyros, pushed off a cliff by a king who feared his reputation. The Greeks understood something profound in these hero tales. The very qualities that make someone great often lead to their downfall. Perseus succeeded because he accepted help. Theseus failed because he couldn't accept limits. Glory and tragedy were 2 faces of the same coin, and you couldn't have one without risking the other. Heracles was Zeus's answer to a prophecy and Hera's greatest hatred. The prophecy said that a descendant of Perseus would rule over all others of Perseus's line. Zeus planned for this to be his own son. He came to Alcmene, wife of Amphitryon, disguised as her husband, while the real Amphitryon was at war. Zeus made that single night last the length of 3, conceiving the greatest hero who would ever live. But Hera discovered the plan. On the day Heracles was to be born, Zeus foolishly swore an oath. "Today, a child of my blood from Perseus's line will be born, who shall rule over all around him." Hera, goddess of childbirth, delayed Alcmene's labor and accelerated another. Eurystheus, also descended from Perseus, was born hours before Heracles. By Zeus's own oath, Eurystheus would be king, and Heracles would serve him. Even as an infant, Heracles was extraordinary. When Hera sent 2 serpents into his crib, his twin brother Iphicles screamed in terror. Baby Heracles grabbed one snake in each hand and strangled them, giggling like it was a game. Amphitryon found him playing with the dead serpents like toys. Heracles grew with impossible strength and an appetite to match. He could eat a whole ox for dinner. He broke every weapon given to him simply by using it. His music teacher, Linus, made the mistake of striking him for playing poorly. Heracles hit back with his lyre, killing the man instantly. He didn't mean to. He simply didn't know his own strength.
As a young man, he defended Thebes from invaders and was rewarded with marriage to Princess Megara. They had 3 children. For a brief time, Heracles knew happiness, but Hera's hatred was patient and cruel. She sent madness upon him, a red haze that turned the world into nightmare. In his insanity, Heracles saw his children as enemies, his wife as a monster. He killed them all with the same hands that had protected them. When the madness cleared and he saw what he'd done, his scream could be heard on Olympus. Heracles wanted to die, but his friend Theseus stopped him. "Death is too easy," Theseus said. "Live with it. Make amends." The oracle at Delphi told Heracles his path to redemption. Serve his cousin Eurystheus for 12 years, performing whatever labors were demanded. Eurystheus was everything Heracles wasn't. Weak, cowardly, petty. He hid in a bronze jar whenever Heracles approached, relaying orders through a herald. He chose labors designed to be impossible, hoping each would be the last. The first labor seemed simple: kill the Nemean lion. But this was no ordinary lion. Its golden fur couldn't be pierced by any weapon. Arrows bounced off, swords shattered. Heracles wrestled it with his bare hands, choking it to death in a grip that could crack mountains. He skinned it with its own claws, the only things sharp enough to cut its hide, and wore the pelt as armor for the rest of his life. The second labor was the Lernaean Hydra, a water serpent with 9 heads. Cut off one head, 2 grew back. Its blood was deadly poison. Its breath could kill at a distance. Heracles' nephew Iolaus helped him, burning each neck stump with a torch before new heads could grow. The central head was immortal. Heracles buried it under a massive rock that still stands. He dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, making them lethal to god and mortal alike. The third labor took a full year. Capture the Ceryneian hind, a deer sacred to Artemis with golden antlers and bronze hooves. It could outrun arrows. Heracles chased it across Greece, through Thrace, beyond the land of the Hyperboreans where the sun never sets. Finally, he caught it drinking at a river, netting it without shedding blood. Artemis met him on the way back, furious at the capture of her sacred animal. Heracles explained his servitude, and the goddess, who understood unjust punishment, let him complete his task. The fourth labor was the Erymanthian boar, which he had to bring back alive. He chased it into deep snow where it couldn't run, then carried it on his shoulders to Eurystheus. The cowardly king took one look at the massive tusked beast and dove into his bronze jar, screaming for Heracles to get rid of it. The fifth labor was different. Clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas owned thousands of immortal cattle. Their stables hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. The filth was so deep it had become geological, stratified layers of manure like sedimentary rock. Heracles diverted 2 rivers through the stables, washing them clean in hours. But Eurystheus refused to count this labor. Heracles had used his brain instead of his hands. The sixth labor sent him to Lake Stymphalia, where man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers they could launch like arrows had made their roost. Athena gave Heracles bronze castanets made by Hephaestus. The noise frightened the birds into flight, and Heracles shot them down with his poisoned arrows. The seventh labor took him to Crete for the bull that had fathered the Minotaur. It had broken free and was ravaging the countryside, breathing fire. Heracles wrestled it into submission and rode it across the sea back to Greece. The eighth labor involved the mares of Diomedes, 4 horses fed on human flesh. Heracles fed their master to them, which cured their taste for human meat. He brought them back to Eurystheus, who dedicated them to Hera. Their descendants were said to be untamable. The ninth labor seemed designed to humiliate. Fetch the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Amazingly, Hippolyta was willing to give it freely, impressed by Heracles' reputation. But Hera, disguised as an Amazon, spread rumors that Heracles planned to kidnap their queen.
In the resulting battle, Heracles killed Hippolyta and took the girdle from her body. He never forgave himself for killing someone who had offered friendship. The 10th labor sent him to the edge of the world for the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was a giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist, 3 heads, 6 arms, 6 legs. His cattle were guarded by a 2-headed dog named Orpheus. To reach them, Heracles had to pass the pillars at the edge of the Mediterranean. He split a mountain in 2 to create the Strait of Gibraltar, marking the boundary between the known and unknown worlds. The 11th labor descended into nightmare. Steal golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. These were Hera's wedding apples, guarded by a 100-headed dragon that never slept. Heracles tricked Atlas into getting them. While Atlas fetched the apples, Heracles held up the sky. When Atlas returned and tried to leave Heracles with his burden, Heracles asked him to hold the sky for just a moment while he adjusted his lion pelt for comfort. Atlas took back the sky, and Heracles walked away with the apples. The 12th and final labor was the worst. Bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed dog who guarded the gates of the Underworld. Heracles had to enter the land of the dead while still alive. He was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries to prepare his soul for the journey. In the Underworld, he found Theseus trapped in the chair of forgetfulness and pulled him free. Hades agreed to loan Cerberus if Heracles could subdue the dog without weapons. Heracles wrestled all 3 heads into submission and carried Cerberus to the surface. Eurystheus took one look at the hellhound and released Heracles from service. Free at last, Heracles had many more adventures. He fought with the gods against the giants. He freed Prometheus from his eternal torture. He wrestled death himself to save a friend's wife. He sailed with the Argonauts, though he left early to search for his lost squire. But his end came from the Hydra's poison he'd carried for years. His wife Deianira, tricked by a dying centaur, gave him a robe soaked in what she thought was a love potion. It was actually Hydra venom mixed with the centaur's blood. The robe bonded to Heracles' skin, burning him with agony no mortal could survive. But Heracles was only half mortal, so he couldn't die. He built his own funeral pyre on Mount Oeta. As the flames consumed his mortal half, his divine nature was freed. Zeus brought him to Olympus, where even Hera finally made peace with him. He married Hebe, goddess of youth, and became the god of strength and heroes. Heracles represents the human condition magnified to mythic proportions. Incredible strength coupled with lack of control, great victories shadowed by terrible losses, the capacity to endure any labor, survive any challenge, except the ones we create for ourselves. He was proof that even the strongest among us need redemption, and that redemption must be earned through suffering and service. The greatest war in Greek mythology began with an apple and a beauty contest, but its roots went deeper, to divine politics, human pride, and the gods' decision that the age of heroes had grown too bright. Too many demigods walked the earth. Their power threatened the balance between mortal and divine. Zeus and the other gods agreed. A great war would thin their numbers. The catalyst came at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. Thetis was a sea nymph with a dangerous prophecy attached. Her son would be greater than his father. Zeus and Poseidon had both desired her until they learned this. They quickly arranged her marriage to Peleus, a mortal hero, ensuring her son would be safely mortal too. Every god and goddess was invited to the wedding, except Eris, goddess of discord. The omission was intentional. Who wants discord at a wedding? But Eris came anyway, invisible, and rolled a golden apple among the guests. On it was inscribed Callisti, for the fairest. 3 goddesses claimed the apple: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom; Aphrodite, goddess of love. They turned to Zeus for judgment, but he was too clever to fall into that trap. He declared that a mortal should judge, someone with no stake in divine politics. That mortal was Paris, a prince of Troy. He'd been abandoned as a baby because of a prophecy that he would destroy the city. Raised by shepherds, he'd been recently acknowledged by his father, King Priam, after proving himself in athletic contests. He was beautiful, vain, and utterly unprepared for what was coming.
The three goddesses appeared to Paris on Mount Ida. Each offered a bribe. Hera promised to make him king of all Europe and Asia. Athena offered wisdom and skill in war. He would never lose a battle. Aphrodite leaned close and whispered her offer. The most beautiful woman in the world would be his. Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite. In that moment, he won the goddess of love as an ally and earned the eternal hatred of the queen of gods and the goddess of war. Troy's fate was sealed. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen of Sparta. She was daughter of Zeus and Leda. Zeus had come to Leda as a swan. Helen's beauty was so extraordinary that Theseus had kidnapped her as a child. When she came of age, princes and kings from across Greece sought her hand. Her foster father, Tyndareus, faced an impossible situation. Choose one suitor, make enemies of all the others. Odysseus, cleverest of the Greeks, provided the solution. Before Helen chose, all suitors would swear an oath to defend her marriage and punish anyone who violated it. They all swore, binding themselves to a war they couldn't foresee. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon who ruled Mycenae. They married and ruled Sparta together. They had a daughter, Hermione. For 10 years, they lived in peace. Then Paris came to Sparta as a guest. Menelaus welcomed him with full hospitality, sacred in Greek culture. But when Menelaus left to attend his grandfather's funeral in Crete, Paris made his move. With Aphrodite's help, he seduced Helen. Or perhaps Aphrodite simply made Helen fall in love against her will. The stories differ. Either way, Helen left with Paris, taking vast treasures from the palace. When Menelaus returned to an empty palace, his rage could be heard across the Aegean. Paris had violated every law of hospitality. He had stolen a wife, a queen, a daughter of Zeus. Menelaus called upon the oath-takers. Every king and prince who had sought Helen's hand was bound to fight. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, took command. As the most powerful king in Greece, ruling from Golden Mycenae, he had the authority to unite the fractious Greeks. But he also had his own ambitions. Troy controlled the Hellespont, the crucial trade route to the Black Sea. Whoever controlled Troy controlled the flow of grain, gold, and goods between east and west. The greatest heroes of Greece answered the call, but 2 tried to avoid their fate. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, pretended madness. When the recruiters came, they found him ploughing his fields with salt, yoking an ox and a donkey together. But Palamedes placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus in front of the plough. Odysseus stopped, proving his sanity, and was forced to honor his oath. He would not see home again for 20 years. The other was Achilles, son of Peleus and Thetis, from whose wedding this all began. His mother knew the prophecy. If Achilles went to Troy, he would win eternal glory, but die young. If he stayed home, he would live long, but be forgotten. Thetis disguised him as a girl and hid him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on Skyros. But Odysseus was sent to find him. He came to court disguised as a merchant, spreading out jewelry and dresses, and one sword. When a war trumpet suddenly sounded, the girls fled, but one reached for the sword. Achilles was discovered. Given the choice his mother feared, he chose glory over life. The Greek fleet gathered at Aulis, 1,000 ships, the greatest armada ever assembled. But as they prepared to sail, the winds died. Day after day, the sea remained glass smooth. The prophet Calchas revealed the cause. Agamemnon had boasted he was a better hunter than Artemis herself. The goddess demanded a price for his hubris, the sacrifice of his daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon faced an impossible choice: his daughter or his war, his family or his honor. He chose the war. He sent for Iphigenia, telling her mother Clytemnestra that the girl would marry Achilles. When she arrived, dressed as a bride, she found an altar instead of a wedding. Some say Artemis substituted a deer at the last moment, spiriting Iphigenia away to serve as her priestess. Others say the girl died on her father's blade. Either way, Clytemnestra's love for her husband died that day. She would wait 10 years for his return, not to welcome him, but to murder him. The winds returned, the fleet sailed, but the Greeks landed first on the wrong shore and fought the wrong enemy, losing years before they even found Troy. When they finally reached the right beach, the Trojans were ready. The first Greek to leap ashore would die. Another prophecy. The ships hesitated just offshore until Prometheus jumped, knowing his fate. Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, killed him immediately. But his sacrifice inspired the Greeks to storm the beach. The Trojans retreated behind their famous walls built by Poseidon and Apollo themselves. For 9 years, the war ground on. The Greeks couldn't breach Troy's walls. The Trojans couldn't drive the Greeks from their beaches. Instead, the Greeks raided the surrounding cities for supplies and slaves. Heroes died by the hundreds, their names preserved in catalogues of the dead. It was in the 10th year that the story we know from Homer's Iliad begins, and it began, as so many Greek stories do, with pride and anger. Agamemnon had taken Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, as his prize. When her father came to ransom her, Agamemnon refused with contempt. Apollo answered his priest's prayers with a plague. For 9 days, Greeks died, first the animals, then the men, funeral pyres burning without pause. Achilles called an assembly. The prophet Calchas, guaranteed protection, revealed the cause. Agamemnon must return Chryseis. Agamemnon raged, but relented. However, he demanded compensation. He would take Achilles' prize, a woman named Briseis. This wasn't about women, not really. It was about honor, respect, recognition. Achilles was the greatest warrior, but Agamemnon was the commander. When Agamemnon's heralds came for Briseis, Achilles let them take her, but he withdrew from fighting, and with him went his Myrmidons, the finest soldiers in the Greek army. Achilles' mother, Thetis, heard his prayers. She went to Zeus and called in an old debt. She had once freed him when other gods tried to overthrow him. Zeus agreed to give the Trojans victory until the Greeks acknowledged Achilles' worth. Without Achilles, the Greeks began losing badly. Hector led the Trojans in assault after assault. He was everything a hero should be: brave, honorable, fighting not for glory, but to protect his city, his wife Andromache, his infant son. The Greeks were driven back to their ships. Agamemnon sent embassy after embassy to Achilles. He offered to return Briseis untouched, plus treasure, plus marriage to his daughter. Achilles refused everything. His rage had calcified into something harder than pride. Then Patroclus acted. He was Achilles' closest companion. Some say his lover, others his dearest friend. He couldn't bear watching Greeks die while he and Achilles sat idle. He begged Achilles, "If you won't fight, let me wear your armor and lead the Myrmidons. The Trojans will think you've returned and flee." Achilles agreed, but gave strict instructions. Drive the Trojans from the ships, then return. Don't pursue them to Troy. But Patroclus, drunk on success, on feeling like Achilles, chased the Trojans to their very walls. Apollo himself had to strike him down, stunning him, knocking off his armor. Hector delivered the killing blow. When Achilles heard the news, his scream was so terrible that his mother heard it at the bottom of the sea. His grief transformed into rage that made his earlier anger look like a candle flame. He would kill Hector. Nothing else mattered. Thetis brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus, a shield depicting the entire cosmos, armor that blazed like fire. Achilles reconciled with Agamemnon, but it was empty ceremony. All that mattered was blood. When Achilles took the field, the Trojans ran. He killed so many that the river Scamander became clogged with corpses and actually rose up to fight him, trying to drown him in its waters. Hephaestus had to drive the river back with fire. The gods themselves began fighting: Apollo against Poseidon, Athena against Ares, Hera against Artemis. Finally, Achilles and Hector faced each other alone outside Troy's walls. Hector's parents watched from the ramparts, begging him to come inside, but Hector knew his fate and accepted it. At first he ran, not from cowardice, but from the terrible divinity blazing from Achilles. 3 times they circled the city. Then Athena, disguised as Hector's brother, convinced him to stand and fight. When Hector turned to face his death,
He asked one thing: whoever wins, let them return the other's body for proper burial. Achilles refused. There would be no mercy, no honor, nothing but vengeance. The fight was brief. Achilles knew every weakness in the armor. It was his own, stripped from Patroclus. His spear found the gap at the throat. As Hector died, he prophesied, "You too will die soon, at the Scaean gate, by Paris and Apollo." Achilles didn't care about prophecies. He pierced Hector's ankles, threaded them with leather cords, and dragged the body behind his chariot. For 12 days, he dragged Hector's corpse around Patroclus's tomb, but Apollo preserved the body from decay, and finally the gods had enough. They sent King Priam, Hector's father, to Achilles' tent at night. The old man knelt before his son's killer and kissed the hands that had murdered his child. "Remember your own father," Priam said. "He too is old. He too will lose a son." For the first time since Patroclus died, Achilles wept. The two men, enemies, cried together, for Hector, for Patroclus, for all the dead, for the mortality that comes for everyone. Achilles returned Hector's body. Troy mourned for 9 days. Achilles' death came as prophesied. Paris, guided by Apollo, shot an arrow that found Achilles' only vulnerable spot, his heel, where his mother had held him when she dipped him in the river Styx as a baby. The greatest warrior of the age was killed by the man who had started it all. But Troy's fate was sealed by cleverness, not strength. Odysseus conceived the wooden horse. The Greeks built it tall as a temple, hollow, with their best warriors hidden inside. They burned their camp, sailed away, leaving only the horse and one man, Sinon, who told the Trojans it was an offering to Athena. The Trojans debated. Cassandra, cursed with true prophecy no one believed, screamed warnings. Laocoon, a priest, threw a spear at the horse and said the famous words, "I fear Greeks, even bearing gifts." Poseidon sent sea serpents to strangle him and his sons. The Trojans took this as a sign and pulled the horse into their city. That night, as Troy celebrated, the Greeks emerged. They opened the gates for the returned army. Troy burned. Priam was butchered on an altar. Hector's infant son was thrown from the walls. The women were enslaved. A civilization that had stood for generations ended in a single night. The gods were disgusted by the Greeks' savagery and victory. They cursed the homecomings. Agamemnon returned to find his wife's axe waiting. Ajax went mad and fell on his sword. Odysseus wandered for 10 years. The age of heroes ended not with glory, but with exhaustion, brutality, and divine abandonment. Of all the Greeks who fought at Troy, Odysseus had the strangest journey home. 10 years to reach Troy, 10 years fighting, 10 years returning. Half a lifetime spent away from Ithaca, his small rocky kingdom. His story is about more than monsters and gods. It's about the price of cleverness, the weight of identity, the struggle to remain human in inhuman circumstances. After Troy fell, Odysseus and his 12 ships sailed for home. First came the Cicones, allies of Troy. Odysseus's men sacked their city, but lingered too long drinking and feasting. Reinforcements arrived and killed 72 Greeks. It was the first lesson. Victory makes men stupid. Next came the Lotus Eaters, whose fruit made men forget. Those who ate it lost all desire for home, wanting only to stay and eat lotus forever. Odysseus had to drag his men back to the ships by force. Memory, he learned, is what makes us human. Without it, we're nothing. Then came the Cyclops. Odysseus and 12 men explored a cave filled with cheese and sheep. The cave belonged to Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, a giant with one eye who saw humans as food. He rolled a boulder across the entrance and ate 2 men for dinner, 2 for breakfast. Odysseus couldn't kill him. Only the Cyclops could move the boulder. Instead, he offered wine, the strongest wine salvaged from Troy. Polyphemus drank it undiluted and asked Odysseus his name. "My name is Nobody," Odysseus lied. When the Cyclops passed out drunk, Odysseus and his men drove a sharpened olive stake into his eye. Polyphemus screamed for help. "Nobody is killing me," he cried. The other Cyclopes assumed he was ill and left him alone. In the morning, Odysseus and his men escaped by clinging to the undersides of sheep. But as they sailed away, Odysseus couldn't resist revealing himself. "If anyone asks who blinded you," he shouted, "tell them it was Odysseus of Ithaca, sacker of cities." That boast cost everything. Polyphemus prayed to his father Poseidon, and the sea god cursed Odysseus to wander for years, to lose all his men, to return home unrecognized and find his house full of enemies. Every word came true. Aeolus, master of winds, tried to help. He gave Odysseus a bag containing all winds except the gentle west wind that would blow them home. For 9 days they sailed. Ithaca came into sight, and Odysseus, exhausted, finally slept. His men, thinking the bag held treasure, opened it. The winds exploded out, driving them back to Aeolus, who refused to help again. The gods clearly wanted Odysseus to suffer. The Laestrygonians were cannibalistic giants who destroyed 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships. They harpooned Greeks like fish. Only Odysseus's own ship escaped because he'd moored it outside the harbor, always cautious. With 1 ship and 45 men left, Odysseus reached Aeaea, island of Circe. She was a goddess and witch, daughter of the sun. She turned half his men into pigs with drugged wine. But Hermes gave Odysseus an herb called moly that protected him from magic. When her spell failed, Circe recognized something divine in him. She restored his men and became his lover. For a year they stayed, feasting, recovering from trauma. But Odysseus's men finally reminded him of home. Circe told him he must first journey to the land of the dead. He needed prophecy from Tiresias, the blind seer who retained his wisdom even in death. At the world's edge, where the sun never shines, Odysseus dug a pit and filled it with sheep's blood. The dead came to drink, shadows desperate for even this echo of life. He saw Agamemnon, murdered by his wife. He saw Achilles, who said he'd rather be a living slave than a dead king. He saw his own mother, who had died of grief waiting for his return. He tried to embrace her 3 times, but she slipped through his arms like smoke. Tiresias warned him about the cattle of the sun. Whatever happens, don't eat them. If you do, you'll lose everything. He also revealed that even after reaching home, Odysseus would have to journey again, carrying an oar inland until someone mistook it for a winnowing fan. Only then would his wandering truly end. Circe prepared them for the path ahead. First, the sirens, creatures whose song made men throw themselves into the sea. Odysseus plugged his men's ears with beeswax, but had himself tied to the mast. He wanted to hear the song that promised perfect knowledge. When the music came, he begged to be released, but his men tied him tighter until they passed. Next came the choice between Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis was a whirlpool that swallowed the sea 3 times daily. Scylla was a 6-headed monster who ate sailors. Odysseus chose Scylla, losing 6 men, but saving the ship. Sometimes leadership means choosing who dies. They reached Thrinacia, island of the sun's cattle. Odysseus made his men swear not to touch them, but storms trapped them there for a month. Supplies ran out. They were starving. While Odysseus prayed for guidance, his men broke their oath and slaughtered the cattle. The slaughtered cattle did impossible things. The hides crawled, the meat on the spits bellowed. When they sailed, Zeus struck the ship with lightning. Everyone drowned except Odysseus, who clung to wreckage for 9 days. He washed ashore on Ogygia, island of Calypso. She was a goddess, beautiful beyond mortal comprehension and desperately lonely. She kept Odysseus for 7 years, offering immortality if he'd stay as her husband. But every day he sat on the shore, weeping for home. Finally, Athena convinced Zeus to intervene. Hermes told Calypso to release him. Odysseus built a raft and sailed for 17 days. On the 18th, Poseidon saw him and shattered the raft with a storm. Odysseus would have drowned, but a sea goddess gave him a magic veil that kept him afloat. He swam for 2 days and nights. He reached Scheria, land of the Phaeacians. Princess Nausicaa found him naked and salt-crusted on the beach. The Phaeacians were beloved by the gods, their ships faster than thought. King Alcinous offered his daughter in marriage, but Odysseus only wanted passage home. At a feast, Odysseus wept, hearing a bard sing of Troy. Alcinous asked his identity. When Odysseus revealed himself and told his story, the Phaeacians were amazed. They loaded him with treasure and sailed him home overnight while he slept. They carried him onto an Ithacan beach and left him there, still sleeping. Poseidon turned their ship to stone as it returned, but his revenge was complete. Odysseus woke alone on a beach he didn't recognize. Athena had shrouded it in mist. When she revealed herself and lifted the mist, he saw he was home. 20 years had passed. But his trials weren't over. His palace was full of suitors, 108 men eating his food, courting his wife, plotting to kill his son. They believed Odysseus dead. Athena disguised him as an old beggar. First, he went to his loyal swineherd, Eumaeus. There he met his son, Telemachus, now 20, who had been searching for news of his father. When Odysseus revealed himself, Telemachus thought he was a god. No god, Odysseus told him, just your father, finally home. Together they planned. Odysseus entered his own palace as a beggar. The suitors mocked and abused him. His old dog Argos, waiting 20 years, recognized him, wagged his tail once, and died. His old nurse, washing his feet, recognized a scar from a boar hunt. He swore her to silence. Penelope, his wife, had spent 20 years holding off the suitors with tricks. She'd promised to choose when she finished weaving a shroud, but every night she unraveled what she'd woven. When discovered, she proposed a contest. Whoever could string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads could marry her. The suitors all failed to even string the bow. The beggar asked to try. Despite mockery, he strung it easily and shot through all 12 axes. Then he turned the bow on the suitors. With Telemachus and 2 loyal servants, Odysseus slaughtered all 108 suitors. The hall ran red with blood. He hanged the servant women who had slept with the suitors. It was justice, but it was also massacre. Even Penelope wouldn't believe it was him. She tested him, asking servants to move their bed outside. Odysseus exploded. "That bed can't be moved. I built it around a living olive tree. The tree is the bedpost." Only Odysseus could know this. Finally, Penelope believed. They held each other and wept, for the 20 years lost, for who they'd been, for who they'd become. Athena held back the dawn to give them a longer night together. The suitors' families sought vengeance. Civil war threatened until Athena intervened, commanding peace. But Odysseus's wandering wasn't done. He still had to carry that ore inland, to a place where no one knew the sea, to finally appease Poseidon. The Odyssey is about coming home, but it's also about how war changes us. Odysseus left Ithaca as a king. He returned as a stranger who had seen too much. He'd been a hero, a nobody, a beggar, a monster. He'd chosen survival over honor, cleverness over strength. He came home, but home was no longer simple. Neither was he. The Greek gods loved mortals, literally, passionately, destructively. These affairs rarely ended well. Divine love was transformation, sometimes transcendent, usually tragic. The gods could take any form, appear as anyone, and mortals had no defense against divine desire. Take Europa. She was picking flowers by the sea when Zeus saw her. He became a white bull, beautiful and gentle, who laid down at her feet. She climbed on his back, laughing. He walked into the waves and kept walking. By the time she realized this was no ordinary bull, they were far from shore. He took her to Crete, where she bore him 3 sons, including Minos, who would build the labyrinth. A continent bears her name, but she never saw her home again. Or consider Io, priestess of Hera. Zeus desired her, and Hera suspected. To hide his adultery, Zeus transformed Io into a white heifer. But Hera wasn't fooled. She asked for the cow as a gift and set Argus to guard her, a giant with 100 eyes that never all closed at once. Zeus sent Hermes to free Io. Hermes told stories and played music until all 100 eyes closed, then cut off Argus's head. Hera placed Argus's eyes in the peacock's tail and sent a gadfly to torment Io. The cowgirl ran across the world, mad with pain. She swam seas. The Ionian Sea and Bosphorus, cow crossing, bear witness to her journey. Finally, in Egypt, Zeus restored her human form. She gave birth to a son and founded a dynasty, but the trauma never left her. Sometimes mortals pursued gods, with equally poor results. Actaeon was hunting when he accidentally saw Artemis bathing. The virgin goddess transformed him into a stag. His own hunting dogs tore him apart while he tried to call their names through a deer's throat. Apollo's loves were cursed with particular creativity. Daphne, a river nymph, ran from his advances. As he caught her, she prayed for escape. Her father, a river god, answered. She transformed into a laurel tree. Apollo made the laurel sacred, wearing its leaves as a crown, but he was embracing bark, not flesh. Cassandra accepted Apollo's gift of prophecy, then rejected his love. He couldn't take back the gift, but he added a curse. She would always speak truth and never be believed. She saw Troy's fall, warned everyone, and was dismissed as mad. After Troy fell, she was murdered in Mycenae, still screaming warnings no one heard. But the strangest love story belonged to Pygmalion. He was a sculptor who hated women, finding them all flawed, so he carved his ideal woman from ivory, perfect, cold, still. He fell in love with his own creation. He dressed the statue, brought it gifts, kissed its marble lips. At Aphrodite's festival, Pygmalion prayed for a wife like his statue. The goddess understood what he really wanted. When he returned home and kissed the statue, it warmed under his lips. Ivory became flesh. The statue opened her eyes. They married and had a son, but imagine being that woman, born to love the man who created you, with no past, no choice, no existence before his desire. The greatest transformation story was Eros and Psyche. Psyche was so beautiful that people worshipped her instead of Aphrodite. The goddess, enraged, sent her son Eros to make Psyche fall in love with something hideous. But Eros pricked himself with his own arrow and fell in love with her. Psyche's parents, following an oracle, left her on a mountaintop to marry a monster. The west wind carried her to a magical palace. Her husband came only in darkness, forbidding her to see him. For months they were happy. She was loved completely, but knew nothing about her lover except his voice and touch. Psyche's jealous sisters convinced her that her husband must be the monster prophesied. One night, she lit a lamp while he slept. She saw not a monster, but the god of love himself, beautiful beyond description. Hot oil from the lamp dripped on his shoulder. He woke, saw her betrayal, and flew away. "Love cannot live without trust," he said. Psyche searched everywhere for Eros. Finally, she went to Aphrodite, who set impossible tasks. Sought a mountain of mixed grains by dawn. Ants helped her. Gather golden wool from killer sheep. A reed whispered to wait until they slept. Fill a jar with water from the river Styx. Zeus's eagle fetched it. The final task: descend to the underworld and bring back a box of Persephone's beauty. Psyche succeeded, but couldn't resist opening the box. It contained not beauty, but the sleep of death. She fell unconscious, but Eros, healed and forgiving, flew to her. He wiped away the sleep and carried her to Olympus. Zeus made her immortal. She became the goddess of the soul, married to love itself. Not all transformations were about love. Arachne was a weaver who claimed she was better than Athena. The goddess challenged her to a contest. Athena wove the gods in their glory. Arachne wove the gods' crimes, Zeus's rapes, Apollo's cruelties. Her work was perfect and perfectly insulting. Athena destroyed the tapestry and transformed Arachne into the first spider, condemned to weave forever. King Midas received the golden touch from Dionysus as a reward. Everything he touched turned to gold: food, wine, even his daughter in some versions. The gift became a curse. He begged Dionysus to take it back. The god told him to bathe in the river Pactolus, which is why that river bears gold. Midas didn't learn. Later, judging a music contest between Apollo and Pan, he declared Pan the winner. Apollo gave him ass's ears. Midas hid them under a hat, but his barber knew. The barber, unable to keep the secret, dug a hole and whispered into it. King Midas has ass's ears. Reeds grew from that spot. When wind blew through them, they whispered the secret to everyone. Narcissus was so beautiful that everyone who saw him fell in love. He rejected them all, including Echo, a nymph cursed to only repeat what others said. She wasted away until only her voice remained. The gods punished Narcissus. He fell in love with his own reflection in a pool. He couldn't touch it, couldn't leave it. He died staring at himself, transforming into the flower that bears his name. These transformation stories weren't just entertainment. They were warnings about boundaries between mortal and divine, human and animal, self and other. Cross those boundaries, and you might never return. Love a god, and you'll be transformed by it. Challenge heaven, and you'll be reminded you're earth. The Greeks understood that metamorphosis was both the greatest gift and the ultimate punishment. To change completely is to die and be reborn, and there's no guarantee you'll prefer what you become. Death, for the Greeks, wasn't an ending, but a transition to a grey existence. The Underworld, Hades' realm, wasn't hell. It was where all mortals went, good and evil alike, to exist as shadows of their former selves. The geography of death was as detailed as any map of the living world. When Greeks died, Hermes Psychopompos, Hermes the soul guide, led them to the river Styx. There waited Charon, the ferryman, ancient and grim. He demanded payment, a coin placed under the tongue or on the eyes during burial. Those who couldn't pay wandered the shore for 100 years. This is why Greeks always buried their dead with coins, even the poorest. The Styx was the most famous river, but 4 others wound through the underworld. Acheron, the river of woe; Cocytus, the river of lamentation; Phlegethon, the river of fire; Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Souls drank from Lethe to forget their earthly lives, preparing for reincarnation, though not all Greeks believed in rebirth. At the gates stood Cerberus, the 3-headed dog. He let souls enter, but never leave. Each head saw past, present, and future. His tail was a serpent, his mane writhed with snakes. Only 3 living mortals ever passed him and returned: Heracles, Orpheus, and Aeneas. Beyond Cerberus lay the fields of Asphodel, where ordinary souls wandered. They were neither punished nor rewarded, just diminished. They drifted like smoke, occasionally gathering to drink blood offerings that let them remember who they'd been. This was the fate of most, not torment, but eternal mediocrity. The wicked went to Tartarus, that abyss below the underworld. Here the Titans remained chained. Here too were mortals who had personally offended the gods. Their punishments were eternally creative. Tantalus had fed his son to the gods as a test of their omniscience. He stood in a pool of water under fruit trees. When he bent to drink, the water receded. When he reached for fruit, wind blew the branches away. Eternal hunger and thirst, with relief always just out of reach. Sisyphus had cheated death twice. First, he chained Thanatos so no one could die. Then, when finally killed, he convinced Persephone to let him return to punish his wife for not burying him properly. A lie. His punishment: push a boulder up a mountain. Just before the peak, it rolls back down, forever. Ixion had tried to seduce Hera. He was bound to a burning wheel that spun for eternity. The Danaids, who murdered their husbands on their wedding night, had to fill a basin with water using sieves. It would never fill. But the blessed went to Elysium, also called the Elysian Fields. Heroes and the righteous enjoyed eternal spring, feasting and competing in athletics without exhaustion. Some said it lay in the underworld. Others placed it at the world's western edge, where the sun sets. 3 judges decided each soul's fate.
Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus had been just kings in life. In death, they continued dispensing justice. They saw through all lies, all pretenses. Death was the ultimate truth. Hades himself was not evil, just inflexible. He was the wealthiest god. All precious metals and gems came from his domain. He owned every soul that had ever lived, but he was lonely. The dead made poor company. So he took Persephone. She was picking flowers in a meadow, specifically narcissus, which Hades had caused to grow as bait. The earth opened. Hades emerged in his black chariot and seized her. Her screams echoed across the world, but only Hecate and Helios witnessed the abduction. Demeter, goddess of grain, searched everywhere for her daughter. For 9 days she wandered, neither eating nor drinking, her torch burning through day and night. On the 10th day, Hecate told her Persephone had been taken, but didn't know by whom. Helios, who sees everything, revealed it was Hades, with Zeus's permission. Demeter's grief turned to rage. She abandoned Olympus and wandered Earth disguised as an old woman. Nothing grew. Seeds didn't sprout. Trees bore no fruit. Humanity began to starve. The earth became barren as Demeter's heart. Zeus had to intervene. Without humans, there would be no sacrifices. He sent Hermes to bring Persephone back. Hades agreed, but as Persephone left, he offered her pomegranate seeds. She ate 6, or 4, or 7, depending on the telling. Anyone who eats the food of the dead must stay with the dead, but a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year underground, 1 month for each seed, and the rest above. When she descends, Demeter mourns and winter comes. When she returns, spring arrives with her. This is the mystery of the seasons, but also of life itself. Persephone became queen of the dead, but she was also Kore, the maiden, goddess of spring flowers. She was death and rebirth in one body. She knew both darkness and light. The most beautiful myth about death was Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived. His music could charm stones to weep, trees to dance, wild beasts to lie down like house cats. He married Eurydice, but on their wedding day, she stepped on a viper and died. Orpheus couldn't accept her death. He took his lyre and descended to the underworld alive. His music made Charon ferry him for free. Cerberus lay down and whimpered at the beauty. The torments of Tartarus paused. Tantalus forgot his thirst. Sisyphus sat on his rock. Ixion's wheel stopped spinning. Orpheus sang to Hades and Persephone of his love, his loss, his need. Even the god of death wept. They agreed to release Eurydice on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead and not look back until both reached the upper world. They climbed in silence. Orpheus heard nothing behind him. No footsteps, no breathing. As he emerged into sunlight, doubt overcame him. Had they tricked him? Was she really there? He turned. Eurydice was there, just 1 step from the surface. She reached for him as she faded, whispered, "Farewell," as she became shadow again. Orpheus tried to follow, but Charon wouldn't ferry him twice. He wandered the earth singing laments until Maenads tore him apart for refusing their advances. His head floated down a river, still singing, until it reached the island of Lesbos. The Greeks didn't fear death itself as much as they feared dying badly. To die unburied, unmourned, forgotten, that was true horror. Antigone chose death rather than leave her brother unburied. Achilles said he'd rather be a living slave than a dead king, but he also chose glory and early death over long obscurity. Death was the great equalizer. Kings and slaves drank from the same river Lethe. Beauty faded to shadow. Strength became memory. Only fame lasted. Kleos, the glory that echoes through generations. This is why heroes chose death over dishonor. The body dies once, but a forgotten name dies forever. We began with chaos, that yawning void of pure potential. We've traveled through the birth of gods, the age of heroes, the tragedy of Troy, the mysteries of death. These stories that are 3,000 years old still shape how we see the world. Every time we talk about an Achilles heel, we remember that everyone has a weakness. When we open a Pandora's box, we acknowledge that some actions can't be undone. When we take an Odyssey, we know the journey will change us. The Greeks gave us these metaphors because they understood something essential. Human nature doesn't change. Their gods were mirrors, reflecting our desires and fears at cosmic scale. Zeus's power and infidelity, Hera's jealousy and protection, Athena's wisdom and cruelty, Apollo's beauty and failure. They weren't perfect beings to worship, but complex characters to learn from. The heroes taught us about choice. Perseus chose to accept help. Theseus chose to volunteer. Heracles chose redemption. Achilles chose glory. Odysseus chose survival. Each choice had consequences that rippled through generations. The monsters weren't just obstacles. They were possibilities. The Minotaur was what happens when we try to hide our shame instead of facing it. Medusa was victim become weapon. The Cyclops was strength without wisdom. The Sirens were knowledge that destroys. Every monster was a lesson about going too far or not far enough. The transformations showed us that change is both gift and curse. Daphne escaped assault but lost her humanity. Arachne kept her skill but lost her form. Narcissus found perfect beauty and perfect isolation. To change is to die to what you were, and sometimes what you become is worse than what you escaped. The Underworld reminded Greeks that death isn't the opposite of life. Forgetting is. As long as stories are told, heroes live. As long as names are spoken, the dead aren't truly gone. Memory is immortality's only form available to mortals. These myths survived because they tell the truth, not about history, but about humanity. We still struggle with pride like hubris. We still sacrifice others for our ambitions like Agamemnon. We still ignore warnings like Cassandra's. We still look back like Orpheus. But we also still choose courage like Perseus. We still endure like Heracles. We still journey home like Odysseus. We still fight for love like Orpheus, even when we know we'll lose. The ancient Greeks understood that life is tragedy and comedy combined, that gods can be petty and humans can be divine, that strength without wisdom is catastrophe, that cleverness without restraint is disaster, that love and death are closer than we'd like to believe. Remember chaos, that first principle? It never went away. It's still here, in every moment of potential, every choice unmade, every story not yet told. The Greeks knew that order is temporary. Chaos always returns. But from chaos comes creation, and from creation comes story, and from story comes meaning. These myths are maps of the human heart. They chart territories we all must navigate: love, loss, pride, shame, courage, fear. They don't provide answers. They provide patterns. They say, others have been here before you. You're not alone in your struggles. So as you drift towards sleep, remember, you carry these stories now. They're part of your mental landscape, these gods and heroes and monsters. When you face impossible choices, you might think of Odysseus. When you feel overwhelmed by tasks, you might remember Heracles. When love seems worth any risk, you might understand Orpheus. The Greeks believed that stories were sacred, not because they were true in the literal sense, but because they were true in the deepest sense. They reveal who we are when everything else is stripped away. Close your eyes now. Let these ancient voices fade into dream. Somewhere, Odysseus is still sailing home. Somewhere, Persephone is rising from the earth, bringing spring. Somewhere, Perseus is lifting his shield, ready to face what cannot be looked at directly. And somewhere, in that place between waking and sleeping, between memory and dream, these stories continue. They always have. They always will. From chaos came everything. To chaos, everything returns. But in between, in this brief moment of form and story and meaning, we have myths to guide us through the darkness. Sleep now. Dream of gods and heroes. Let their stories weave through your rest. Tomorrow, you'll wake to your own Odyssey,
your own labors, your own transformations. But tonight, you've walked with immortals. The echo continues. The story never ends. It just waits to be told again.